Thank you as well too. I appreciate you. You also. This is the 101st episode of my podcast.
Nice.
It's a yeah, big stepping stones for the new year. I'm excited. Actually, have you ever thought about doing a podcast yourself or?
Yeah, I thought about it. Dude, I'm wearing so many hats. Being a father, being a police officer. I was a detective for a while. I'm writing the books. I run my nonprofit to help wounded veterans. I'm like, how the fuck do I start a podcast now? Like, so I thought about it, because at one time I probably I believe that I have the biggest Rolodex of living World War II veterans in the country.
Honestly, yeah, I was gonna say if I've ever even known of. Honestly.
So even if I did like a World War II podcast, I thought about that. But then you got to be like, okay, well, just because I know all these World War II veterans doesn't mean all of them are completely coherent to be on a podcast at their age. So yeah, but I dabbled with it, and the idea came and went because I'm just so damn busy. I got to stay focused on the job that actually makes me money, which is being a police officer. So
yeah. And thank you for your service
Yeah.
too, because and that's another thing. It's so weird that I've noticed in society, just as of late, is just a disrespect to
oh yeah,
that law. And has actually a question like since I don't know if you're like restricted to like what you can say. Like, has there been like a fall in morale since like the past?
Oh,
3
hell
years
yeah.
and stuff? Like, yeah.
3 years. No, yeah, since
Well, more probably. But
yeah,
it's just,
no, there definitely has been, but I'm kind of starting to see it subside, like all the anti-police stuff. But I'm starting to see it kind of fade a little bit. But yeah, I got on in 2014, so this February is 10 years for me that I graduated the police academy. So right after that, things started to get shitty, and it was like, oh man, I just switched my Marine uniform that everyone loved to a fucking uniform that half of people like or something, and so it became, and I was very, especially as a young cop, I was so passionate about being a police officer that when I saw bad stuff on the news about cops, I mean, it destroyed me, like destroyed my heart, destroyed my everything. I was really like lose my hair and sleep over it, seeing, all the stuff going down, so.
Yeah, it's just so absurd, right? Because you're still doing the same role in the sense of defending, your fellow Americans, the
Yep.
country itself. So why just be the uniform change?
Yeah.
Such a significant.
Yeah,
difference?
yeah. Well, and it was also, have we officially started or?
Yeah, we officially, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, my fault. Yeah, oh, my.
Yeah,
yeah, my
yeah.
apologies. Well, if you want, I can, do whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, being
I should have done like.
it's all right. Being a police officer, I absolutely love the job. I still do it. I'll retire as a cop. I was very passionately connected to being a police officer since I was a child. I grew up in public housing, and the cops were my heroes. They'd come up to the projects and clean house on drug addicts, scumbags, crackheads, domestic abusers. I watched it. I loved it. I rooted them on. I grew up in a suburb of Boston, Everett, and so I determined at a young age, like, I want to be a police officer, but I want to serve my country first. This is all before 9/11, so I knew I definitely wanted to be in the military. Probably like in 6th grade, I decided the Marines. Then in 8th or 9th grade, 9/11 happened, and I said, oh, I'm going to miss everything. I'm going to miss the war, man. This is my Pearl Harbor. This is amazing. The whole world supported us, whatever decision, whatever move we wanted to make. And it was such a basically golden nugget for our country to do whatever they had to do to defend itself. Everybody had our back. Every politician, every political background was all do what you guys got to do to defend your country, get rid of terrorism, and what have you. And then of course, you had a line of people at the recruiting stations. Like, it was basically like literally our Pearl Harbor. Everybody was ready to rock and roll and serve. And I was probably a freshman in high school and thinking I was going to miss everything. And by the time I graduated high school, we were involved in 2 wars. And so I went into the Marines. And
oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But did you still have that, even after the 3 years, you still had that enthusiasm like you did, of course?
oh yeah, because Bush came up with this thing that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, and if he wasn't taken out, that he could potentially support these terrorists that are, because that dude 9/11 carried for like, at least 8 to 10 years of, we're gonna turn our head as long as they're radical Islam, we can bomb them, or oh, they're radical Islam, we could invade the country. Like 9/11 carried weight, carried what we wanted to do, and we just did it incorrectly apparently. So we invaded Iraq. I still wanted to serve because it wasn't. I was definitely. I remember being in ninth grade or eighth grade or sophomore in high school and saying, "Why doesn't President Bush show us photos of these weapons of mass destruction if he knows they're there?" I mean, what am I, a peanut-brained eighth grader? Why? And I'm coming like, why doesn't he just? If people are so confused, why doesn't President Bush just show us the photos, or does that like breach security or mess up the mission or whatever? So, besides the fact, I wanted to serve my country regardless of the war, the conflict, or whatever. I wanted to wear the uniform that my grandfathers wore, that people wore generations before me, and serve. So, my first deployment was actually Iraq, and
Did your father serve?
no, my dad didn't.
Okay.
My dad didn't serve, but my grandfathers did and stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, I commend your family. Thank you for
Yeah.
your family.
Thank you. And so I did my first tour in Iraq, and still I'm like, what the hell are we doing here? Like, like I said, I'm a Marine. I'm here to blow stuff up and wreak havoc
Yeah.
as an adrenaline Russian kid, and obviously help the Iraqis over there who needed it. I mean, say what you will about the invasion of Iraq and personal experience, boots on the ground. You don't to hand an Iraqi child a clean bottle of water is like the most exhilarating feeling in the world. The way they would get excited for basic living needs, a clean bottle of water, a watch, of food. I mean, these people. This was absolutely in some parts of Iraq was a humanitarian. A lot of parts of Iraq was a humanitarian mission. I mean, these. I'll never forget my first patrol into a little Iraqi village and giving kids clean water, and that was to me is equivalent of giving some kid a PS3 in America. Their excitement,
Yeah.
and so I really enjoyed my first deployment to Iraq, really. But I came home, went to college, and then went to Afghanistan in all of 2011. I was in Afghanistan.
And I wanted to ask too, like
Mm-hmm.
when you had more, experience, like boots on the ground, seeing the things that were happening, and hearing news probably back home, like did you start questioning more, just start like why, like more like why am I here, like what I'm destroying, like what did you
It
have to
was more
question
when I
your
came home
Yeah.
and I sat in a college seat and was around different kids of different backgrounds and different political views, and that you know I was saying I had a hunch, or I had a chip on my shoulder of having served in Iraq when people here don't appreciate it. There's the insurgency's gone up and soldiers are dying, and was Saddam better off in charge? As much as he ruled with an iron fist, he had his country in control. So there was all those thoughts, and then even worse when ISIS rose. It's like, Jesus, like look what we did to this country, and now get fast forwarding, right? You got to give props to what's left of the Iraqi government and the Iraqi army, even though they almost completely, totally capitulated, right? They actually defended their country, defeated ISIS. ISIS is barely around in Iraq right now, and they're back. They have a police force, they have a military, they have a government. Like, we need to make sure that stays the way it is in Iraq, because we saw what happened in Afghanistan, and we can't let Iraq become a terrorist state, and we got to support these people. We invaded their country. We did all this stuff. Now we owe them, And we're invited by the Iraqi government to maintain these bases over there, the ones that you see on the news getting bombed right now by like Iranian proxy groups. But we need to make sure, that they don't fail, So, and they did they did a good job. They're still in control of their own country. The Iraqi government, they probably have a long way to go, but unlike Afghanistan, which that should have been the focal point of our war on terror, that really should have been a success and a mission. And so if you look at the global war on terror, the one that was supposed to be the good reason to have a good war is now back in Taliban hands and a huge waste, really. And That's the one you wanted to see be a success, Afghanistan, because there was a lot more on the table on why we should have invaded there and been a force there, and so
Do you think it's ever like possible that to go and like take those actions again, or is it kind of just impossible to even try to go for? Because honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I'm very ignorant to the history and knowledge of
well,
the Middle East. So
so
great to hear. Yeah.
there's different sides of the argument that I look at, right? So I think Democrats view because Joe Biden was in charge when Afghanistan crumbled. They say, well, this is a different kind of Taliban. They're not like the Taliban from 2001. They want to run their own country. They're not going to attack America. They don't want to have us in their country for another 20 years. They have a. If you look at them, they have actually uniforms and army. They're not wearing flip flops and AK-47s. Like they're wearing camouflage. They're wearing uniforms. They have a government. They want to be recognized as a real country. China has already recognized them as an official, country and stuff like that. And then you look at the conservatives, or the Republican side of things, where it's big waste and Joe Biden effed up the whole country, and the terrorists are in charge again. And we're gonna have to go back there and be there for another 20 years after once they. So it's, I don't know. I hope deep down inside that we had to make a deal with either worse or worser. So I think our government saw ISIS-K rising in Afghanistan and said, oh shit, the army and the government sucks. We better make a deal with the Taliban, who are going to be less of a threat to us than ISIS-K. That's what
Yeah.
So then you had like the whole Kabul airport situation where the Marines have to do checkpoints with Taliban, and Taliban's responsible for the outer security of the airport, while the Marines are.
Wait, really? I didn't
Oh,
know. See, I didn't know.
yeah.
I was.
Yeah, so the Taliban were responsible for the outer perimeter of the airport, the security, while the Marines had the inner.
That makes
And then
sense.
you wonder why a suicide bomber went in there and murdered 13 of our troops and killed 100 Afghan civilians,
May they rest in peace.
No
and that's awesome that you gave them a corroboration on your.
Yeah,
too,
dedication.
Well.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But see, I didn't even know about that. That's absurd. It's like that's such.
Oh, it's so wild, man. And I would have went to the gates of hell for this country. As a Marine, I would have done anything. I would have marched into any country. I would have done anything that this government and this country wanted me to do for the safety of this beautiful country and this way of life. And I definitely look at things differently now since the fall of Afghanistan. I don't look at generals the same way. I don't look at these three-letter agencies the same way. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not bitter. I'm not here to take, retribution or revenge on these things. I'm just here to worry about me and my family now in my life, and it's too bad because you had a whole generation of kids willing to do anything for this country, had support from all over the world, and we fumbled it because of greed and selfishness and stupidity. Because if they should have known Afghanistan was going to fail. If these three-letter agencies are as good as they are, FBI, CIA, whatever other ones that are intelligence agencies, they would have known the Afghan police were not getting paid for the last 6 months. They would have known that the Afghan army wasn't getting paid for the last year. They would have known what's going on with terrorists. But the problem is like these governments, these private companies were all making money off these wars.
Which even you look at today, honestly, with the Ukraine war and Russia.
Sure. So
Israel and Palestine.
Why pull out of a country when people are getting their pockets fattened up? And instead you tell this country we're leaving next week. You have millions of Afghans trying to flee and leave the country because they don't want to be under Taliban rule. And you send a bunch of 20-year-old kids and 19-year-old kids to go fix the problem, and you send them into the meat grinder to get blown up, dead, murdered, because you're an idiot, And these generals who've built their whole careers on punishing enlisted men and being leaders and telling them they can't leave as much as a bayonet or a hat out of your own supplies somewhere, and if you lose a piece of your gear, you're going to get in trouble and be punished. But then you literally hand a whole country's worth of supplies to an enemy force that you're at war with 20 years later, and then you don't even have the balls to resign, to step down from your position. So that's why I respect generals, a lot of great generals, but I don't look at them the same way as the best I can describe that stuff.
As a historian yourself, like just looking at, for example, like the fall of Rome and like the way we spread ourselves, they spread themselves out too thin.
Yeah.
Do you think it's America just repeating the same mistakes? Like, do you think we are able as a great nation to rebuild and rekindle and
well, the thing is
greatness? Or?
so I think, and I'm gonna get my words confused, but like I think it was something like nationalism and isolation.
Oh, isolation.
Was like, I think it was before World War One. People were just like, let's worry about ourselves. Let's build our own country. We don't care what's going on in Europe. We don't care if a country just got invaded. We don't care if this. Worry about ourselves here, And a lot of people view that as kind of like racist and not helpful to the rest of the world, and because you're shutting down the borders and you're not worrying about other people and you don't want to let anyone else in. You want to focus on your own stuff. And I just think that needs to come every few years. It just needs to come every few years. I think, especially after the war on terror, COVID, social unrest, like there's a lot that we need to do to just, let's just forget about poverty in this country, kids, hunger, sickness, education, look at Chicago, New York, and all the stuff, like the murder capitals of the world. And that isolation stuff needs to come every few years, man. It just does. We got to worry about ourselves. We got to focus ourselves. I mean, sometimes it takes a traumatic event like 9/11 or Pearl Harbor to unite us as a country. People always say, like, I don't want 9/11 to happen again. I don't want December 7th to happen again, but I want September 12th to happen again. I want December 8th to happen again, because we were all one. We were all in this together. Black, white, Spanish, Chinese, Asian, Muslim, Catholic, everybody was together, in it to win it. And now it's like we're all ready to stab each other in the back and blame each other for each other's issues. So
and it's just over just ideals. It's not even like people are now, you have this derangement just because someone believes in one ideal. When I was growing up, even young, people used to have great debates and conversation and not hate one another just because they were even best friends, because if you had a different idea, it doesn't matter if you were Democrat or Republican, you still had an understanding that you were my friend.
Yeah, there was a time where there was a moderate Democrat and a moderate Republican, and both sides could minorly disagree on stuff. But now it's like you said, it's after either right before, maybe it was Barack Obama or maybe even Donald Trump, but stuff became either too far right or too far left, and that's what it has screwed up a lot of this country. Like there's been no in between. We need a great president or a great leader eventually to come down here who is a independent or a moderate Democrat or a easygoing conservative, and help align this.
Yeah, it's definitely, we need a leader to unify us more than ever. Right now we have,
and that's why I'm announcing it that I'm running in 2028. Now I'm just joking.
Right, I was gonna say, let's go, Andrew Biggio. I'll have you on the podcast every time. I'll promote anyway.
Yeah.
And that, actually, there's something I don't know if you how you feel about, like, I honestly, I'll vote for Trump. You know what I mean? Just the way the economy was, the way this country was. Like, I don't care if someone gets offended by it.
No, I loved Donald. I have letters here in my house from Donald Trump. I have he sent me $75,000 to help veterans. $75,000. He invited me to the White House.
Was it for your nonprofit?
Yeah.
Really?
Yep.
That's amazing.
I loved a lot about Donald Trump's views. And, a lot of people say there's nothing, no matter what, people were going to come for him. They wanted to cut his, head off on everything is. But he just knew how to be so divisive, and that screwed things up for him, the Twitter, the staying on Twitter, the remarks, if you're dealing with a very sensitive world in a very sensitive country, you got to, as much as you don't want to agree with the left side of things, you need to cater to these people because they're still your citizens, they're still your residents of this country and your community, and you need to have some cooperation with them. And he was just way too divisive on social media, Twitter. I mean, that was the death of him. That stuff, calling people fat pigs and this and that, and not denouncing white supremacy on certain things. I mean, dude, that's you're handing them.
Like a silver platter, right?
Right.
For them to,
And
cut it
then
down.
January 6th, these fucking idiots that went down there and did that shit, like, dude, fuck all those people. I don't care. Like, and I'm a conservative. Like,
Yeah.
you don't see me going around. You just spent a year trying to show us how the left is the criminal party, and they're doing the riots, and they're doing the beanies, and they're destroying small businesses, and they're going after people, and they're lynch mobbing people for stuff on knee-jerk social media stuff, and then you go down to our beautiful nation's capital, and you destroy property, you assault police officers, and you don't think that footage is going to air for the rest of eternity?
Oh yeah.
So.
And like you said, the other side's going to use it against you for all eternity.
And they didn't. And after January 6th, everybody forgot about the riots in Minnesota, New York, L.A., Portland, Seattle, you name it. All that footage and all that barbarism that went down, everyone is virtually gone now because of January 6th, so.
You mean even just like, people, forget like with the Kyle Rittenhouse case.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was like blessed that, that outcome came the way it is, because again, the manipulation of society and social media. I was even talking to individuals who are like, oh, like he purposely shot like all black people. No, not even one of them was a African American or anything.
Exactly.
Like that,
so
again, it's just I think it's just, it doesn't have to be about color, nothing. It's just you see the divide that these corporations are trying to put against us American people. That's really what they want, is to have us fighting against each other and not realize the greater power that's destroying this.
I know, brother. I know.
I want to actually go back to because you were talking about, do you think this country will ever, say an event sadly ever were to happen, in this country, do you ever think that we would, put down all our arms against each other and reunite, or do you think it's almost like too far gone at this point?
You're asking me, is there any way that this country's going to be on the same page again? Is that what you're asking?
Oh, yes,
people?
yes.
Yeah, and like I said, it takes I hate to say this because now I have kids, but it takes a world war. Yeah. It takes a terrorist attack. It takes a traumatic event to unite people, and that sucks because people have to die for that to happen. And now, I served my country. I have 8 years in the service done. I never have to serve again. I have I have discharge papers. I'm a disabled veteran. But now, you know what? My kids might have to serve. My kids might have to go clean up a mess in Afghanistan. And to me, the military was the best choice, best thing that ever happened. But in just like a flick of your fingers, it can be the worst thing. And I got 2 boys now who, if they're like me or if they're anything like me, they're gonna want to go serve too. And I met a lot of Gold Star family members. I met hundreds of wounded veterans over the years, and potentially that stuff could happen to my kids. And these particular families and these wounded veterans have to live with the end result of Afghanistan. And that's the other thing our government didn't take into a knowledge check is, yeah, sure, you're going to hand a war back over to the enemy, but you're also going to have a psychological effect on all these people, millions of people who were involved in the global war on terror. Family members, Gold Star family members, wounded veterans.
Yeah, I was going to say, too, because I know you were talking about, like, another reason you interview these World War II veterans as well, is to help the new generation of vets deal with a life after war. And do you think, with this Afghanistan, this fumble, that's going to make a different psychological impact and harder obstacle for veterans in the future?
Yes, absolutely, because after Vietnam, I mean, you had a lot of people not serve in the military after the Vietnam conflict. Okay, you have a lot of 70s kids and 80s kids and this big peacetime and people who never even thought about uniform because they saw the lies of Vietnam. They saw the way the veterans got treated, and they saw the protests, and there was a ton, and I know that because as a police officer, a lot of the people, my supervisors who would have been Vietnam vets or just younger than that, are not veterans because that wasn't the thing when they grew up. It wasn't the thing. It didn't become a thing again until after 9/11, really.
Yeah.
For a lot of people. Of course, people were still serving, but yeah, and not even that, but now look, like, people see the Taliban are in charge, America ran away, and now all these other terror groups now are basically re-strengthened and think they have the balls now to do whatever they want, and America can get pushed around, and look how weak our leaders are. You know, now you have hundreds of attacks right now. You haven't had this ever. You have now, after a global war on terrorism, 20 years, millions of Arabs and Afghans killed, like some of them deservingly so because they were terrorists, others civilians. And now you have all these groups shooting drone bombs at us and on our bases of guys overseas and being attacked. And you never had this. You haven't had this in forever. I don't even think you had it when the wars were going on, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Yes. Actually, I'm going to move topics real quick. I actually want to go back to, I want to actually go back to your book. And, like, because I haven't read the first one, so that's my apologies on that one.
I'll give you one when you leave.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Awesome. Another thing to read. I need to catch up on some reading. But, no, with the rifle, too, I like how you mentioned you get, like, all walks of life from World War II veterans, like, after war. Like, you had, like, chapter, I believe it was 10, Mobbed Up.
Yeah.
With, I know it's not his real name, but Jay. Like, what was his, like, that seemed like an interesting story too. Like at the end, like he didn't regret the things he did, like the murder case and stuff. Like, what was that? Like, was there anything shocking like through your journey? Like, not in particular his, for example. If that
yeah,
story?
I think his story just reiterated to me. I think it reiterated that the greatest generation can sometimes be scumbags too, and people, even if they get older, they can still be criminal minds and still be losers. So that the way I wrote Rifle 2 was, let's break away from the greatest generation. Everything's happy and drinking milkshakes and swing dancing and nobody swears and cusses. And let's talk about guys who came home with serious issues, who are now in their 90s, right? Because you have two life lessons there. You have, what did you learn from war and how did you live a life after successful combat? And then, what mistakes did you make back home and how did you bounce back from that stuff too? Because some guys' lives are just a straight success story. You came home from World War II, you went through trauma, and then you lived a great, long, successful life. Well, I wanted to cover some of the guys that came home from World War II and then hit speed bumps along the way. And that meant guys who were alcoholics, liars, divorced a few times, and then the gentleman from the chapter Mobbed Up, whose name I switched. Because he made a choice to go into organized crime, drugs, and everything else after World War II. And he was in jail. He did a life sentence. So, you know, and to see him at his age still kind of like not give a shit and that he's not sorry for anything, you know, because mind you, he had just got out of jail again when I interviewed him.
I remember that.
So he was living in a halfway house, you know, and he's basically running the halfway house. He's 98, but he's the shot caller there, you know. So, basically, I mean, he was not necessarily on his deathbed, but his time was almost up. So I was giving him an opportunity to say, "What's going on? Do you regret anything? Do you care? Do you have anything you want to admit?" And you know, he stayed stone cold to the end. So.
Hey, this is how people are wired, right?
Yeah.
I forget which the gentleman's name was, but I think he was a Marine in the 3rd Division. I'm not even going to try to remember because I think it was the Peleliu.
Yeah, Peleliu. That was Emilio.
Yes.
Emilio Maglicane, whose daughter I still stay in touch with. She just wished me Happy New Year last night. And Emilio was, I wish I could have had more time with him. He passed away before the book was finished. He knew I wrote a chapter on him. The family bought hundreds of copies of my book, and he's the first chapter for a reason, because I was a Marine too, and he was the old breed. I mean, he had every reason to come home with PTSD and have his kids hate him and have his family hate him, and he didn't. And every reason to hate the Japanese to his dying day, and he didn't. He came home, he was a good dad, he raised family members who aren't bitter against him like some veterans I meet, and I have him on record that if he got to meet a Japanese soldier today, that he would forgive him and that they were just doing their job. And you never hear that. You hear that a lot with the Americans who fought the Germans, like, oh, he was just a kid doing his job, and of course I forgive them. And 90% of the Pacific veterans I meet still hate the Japanese to this day and would never forgive them for the stuff that was gone.
It's just the gruesome atrocities, or is it just like the war? Like
Exactly.
yeah, okay.
Again, people try to put a racism spin on that. Well, it's because the Japanese weren't Christian, and the Japanese don't look like white people, and so they don't relate to they don't relate to each other as enemies. And our propaganda back then did depict the Japanese to look like cockroaches and bugs and slanted eyes and things like that on cartoons. But really, it's first of all, you start off with the sneak attack on Pearl Harbor, right? So now you have a sneaky enemy. Then you go to the island campaign, and I mean, dude, they treated our POWs, they starved them, they killed them, they have the baton death marks, they tortured them, they tied our guys up to trees and ripped off their testicles and stuffed them in their mouths for other Marines to find. So it started a macabre war where each side did war crimes against each other throughout the whole Pacific campaign.
Yeah, because it was more even more gruesome than even like what the Nazis did in battle. Well, obviously they did their gruesome parts, of course, but it's like
yeah, no, both sides did gruesome parts over in the European theater, but it was different in the Pacific, in the jungles.
Yeah, it's and that's the thing too is that some people they don't understand the glorification of war because they never experienced
Yeah.
it. Just reading these chapters too. Even when he was talking about balloon pop, I forget what they call it.
Burping.
Burping. That's what it was.
Yeah.
I was like, what that? Like burping. I was like, what? And I read that part. I was like, oh wow, damn. Like,
Yeah.
But like you said, you're around that violence, that death all the time. And I feel like just any way to try to get something different, the different emotion, like laughter or something to get you through. Even though it's like these atrocities, but again, people don't understand. Like even myself, like just reading it, I can never fathom. I never want someone to fathom or experience that themselves. But I don't know. Sorry, I'm like, it's just something about World War II. It amazes me again. Just
right.
The things that happen.
Yeah, the stories are unparalleled. They're unmatched. It's fascinating. It's we're gonna be still talking about World War II for a while. And it's now that there's veterans who served it that are still alive. It gives the war shelf life for sure, but. Eventually, I think it'll become like World War I or the Civil War, where it's like, oh, what are those black and white photos of? Oh, that war was 1,000 years ago. And things that feel like that.
And just lose that connection. And,
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's something you're going to maintain like throughout your life? Like, I know we were talking about the podcast, like maybe a podcast one day for yourself. Is that something maybe one day you would love to like focus on as you get older? Like maybe have extra time on your hands? Like,
yeah, no, I mean, I think the next thing is Vietnam. I think the next clicky thing, next military historian geek thing with living veterans is the Vietnam. We are starting to see it. Starting to see a lot of attention and a lot of praise for Vietnam vets that they didn't get. And, our country has enacted a Vietnam Veterans Day. You go to military shows right now, next thing you know, now Vietnam uniforms and Vietnam helmets are getting up there in prices. And,
really?
Yep.
And why is that? Like, do you think it's just because, again, the people are starting to realize the appreciation and the sacrifices made, or is it just history buffs? Like, all right, World War II's, like it's getting
both.
old.
Both.
Okay.
Both. Yep. I think our government's doing a lot of damage control on the Vietnam vets.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Christ, man, they say that the average Vietnam veteran saw like 300 days of combat, 100 days of combat, and the World War II veteran saw 30 days of combat. So.
Either way, either way, a day of combat is already too much for some.
Correct.
Like they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100 days straight, like that's like unfathomable. I can't. What's hope at that point? Right? It's like damn, like any moment you can just be annihilated. And then is there like you ever had a personal interest in the Vietnam War, or is it like you were so focused on World War II?
Yeah, I was sold. I mean, World War II is the most marketed, profited, beneficial war of all time for people's pockets. Yeah, it just still sells today. Video games, movies, tourism. I never had an interest in Vietnam. I had uncles that were in Vietnam. But
are you thinking of having their stories be told as well?
Yeah, I am. But like honestly, I hate to say it, but like whenever I met a Vietnam vet or knew Vietnam, in the back of my head I'd say, "Oh, this poor guy," or
why was that?
They lost their war. I would say that in my head, like, they got the raw deal. Not that they weren't bad terrible. Then you had all these movies coming out like Platoon and Apocalypse Now that just made Vietnam vets look like shit. You
I've
know?
never heard those movies.
Oh yeah, they're doing drugs in the field and raping women and all this shit. And Hollywood just made them look terrible. And so I always never had an interest until I became a Vietnam vet overnight. You know, with the war in Afghanistan. Now I fucking respect these guys 1,000 times more what they went through. You know, so yep.
Like you said, you know, you can sign up for your country. You want to give your life and everything to make sure that it preserves its well-being and greatness. And then, you know, you just get smacked in the face by the very government that you gave your life to. You're like,
Yeah.
hey, oh, what the heck? Like, it's just so. And I wonder why they, you know, Hollywood made such a bad depiction of the, you know, Vietnam veterans. You know, it's just like, was again the money thing? Was it just getting eyeballs? You know, or maybe it was just the time period where so many people were against the war. They said, oh, let's make money off of this moment, you know, because it's like, oh, everyone's against the war, might not make the soldiers. I don't know. I'm not, you know, I'm not in the 70s. I wasn't born, you know, so it's just weird how things are.
Well, the people that protested the Vietnam War and were the hippies and all this bullshit are in charge of the country now, you know, and then you wonder why we fucking let people do whatever they want in this country, and we're worried about, you know, sensitivity and bullshit.
Yeah.
You know, one of the biggest things that come out of like the whole Trump administration and all the protests was a statement I heard: facts, not feelings. And that's so true. And we're so worried about offending people on Twitter and like before, when I grew up, not that I'm an ancient guy, but if you were against a stance or against something political, you understand that you had to sit down, get a pen, write the letter, check it for edits, put it in an envelope, go to the post office, buy a stamp, go to the mailbox and mail it to your local politician. Or if you disagree with something, you had to get on the train, take the train into Boston, get outside, stand outside, buy a piece of cardboard, create a sign, stand out there and protest at the State House. Now, any idiot with a brain or a smartphone can go on their phone and tweet their politician with any knee-jerk reaction, anything they see without facts or details online, and start tweeting at politicians. Then a politician's phone gets crazy, or his secretary's phone blows up, and oh my God, all these people are upset that a cop slapped somebody at a convenience store, right? And then it's like the politician, without knowing details, facts, or investigation, gets on there and goes, I condemn these acts, and we need to rise up and stand up, and you just created a riot, you know, and so, you know, I know I just broke that down Barney style, and sometimes it's not always like that, but take that, times it by 1,000,000 with all these local politicians around, and now this is what you have. You have the minority of people, okay, running the country over sensitivity issues on social media, and I'm talking about not minority, racial minority, but like the minority of thoughts, okay. You know, the minority of the way people view things, a group of people who view stuff in the minority of the way this country are running it with their am I making sense?
No, you are. It's like the minority of the minority. It's
like
such a small percentage.
Right,
Like how
like,
they have the amplified
like
voice.
you know what I mean? Like it's
Well, even like me, like honestly, for example, like my thing I'm against is, you know, putting these, you know, hormone blockers and stuff on young kids.
Of course,
I mean,
that, you know,
especially as a father,
similar stuff like that. Co-ed bathrooms should not be a national topic of anything, you know, and the fact that people go online, or because a police officer abused somebody in Michigan, why do police officers in Boston have to lose their benefits and rights? You know, and that's just not, and what it is a politician wants to make a name for himself and wants to punish police officers for something that happened across the country. In Massachusetts, they want to punish cops for a Kansas cop killing someone, or punish cops in Boston for what a cop in Minneapolis did. And that's just, it's the only occupation where if someone makes a mistake somewhere else in the country, the whole occupation as a whole suffers for it. And so I lost, you know, that's just, we gave idiots a voice with social media. Because I said before, you had to go write letters, you actually had to go show up, you had to actually go talk to a politician in person. And if you were a buffoon, you got no attention.
Yep.
No one catered to you. Now, you create 10 different Twitter accounts, you're 10 people. So.
And that's the thing, such as that, I mean, especially politicians even taking favor for, social media, gain when,
Hmm.
you should be, just keep your eyes on your job and just do, be a public servant.
Yeah.
Make sure that these things are actually doing their due diligence. Is this actually going to make a difference? Is this person just spouting
Hmm.
nuisance at me? Oh, especially this past 3 years, you think it would, wake people up. But again, it showed another thing that our politicians will take any advantage, that they can to have control in some way, shape, and form.
Absolutely.
But I know I was going to say actually, continuing on with the book, like, um, what, like, was it like hearing your aunts, like your forefathers, like stories and stuff like that, that you were interested to even join the military at all, or was it just was it like something in you that you grew
It
up
was
with?
definitely something in me. I mean, my grandfathers weren't like raising me for me to be this big influence to join, but their stories meant something. Uh, my grandfather, whose I share his middle name, was in the Battle of the Bulge with the 10th Armored Division. That's his uniform right there.
Really?
Yep. Um, and then when I got older, I started to realize who I was named after, Andrew Biggio, who was killed in World War II. And so after my own service, I felt guilty that I lived and he died, and I share his name, and I get to carry his legacy. And he was 19 years old when he bled out on a hill in Italy and died. And so I started to really be connected to this long lost relative and read his letters that he wrote home before he was killed and study his life and study him. And I just wanted to give him the best legacy as possible and live the life the way he would have. So
It's just like how many more men, of individuals, veterans, even now, who served and are
correct.
even remembered.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
when it comes to
Just go to the cemeteries over in Europe, man. There's
yeah.
thousands of our kids, our boys, buried there, and you'll probably be the only visitor in the cemetery.
Let me ask actually your experience too, because I love how you are able to bring back the veterans as well to where they fought
Hmm.
in Belgium, France. Like how was that? How's that like to be able to give back? That must be phenomenal to like give back to your fellow
It's my addiction. It's
Yeah.
it's something I need to do, and it's just an amazing to walk on the very battleground that they walked 80 years later. Let's just say 75 years later. Um, it's just exhilarating. It's amazing. It's therapeutic. It's great for younger veterans. I pair a lot on these tours and trips I do are a lot of younger veterans who saw combat, and they're now with the older veterans, going back with them on that's better than any medication, any type of therapy. And I'm so proud to have done, I think, like 15 trips now, and I've brought in over 40 veterans back. You know, if the Pacific wasn't so far away and too hard on these guys for traveling, I'd do it there too. But right now, it's a 7-hour flight, Boston to Paris, Boston to Amsterdam,
Yeah.
direct.
And what you say, like the average is like the veterans like what 96, 100.
They're 100 now.
They're
When I
100 now?
started this,
Oh,
they were
okay.
when I started this, they were 95. And I keep saying that. I'm like, when you're with a 95-year-old veteran, I'm like, wait a minute, I've been saying that for 5 years.
Yeah.
They're 100. They're all 100 right now. The average age for World War II veteran is 100 years old. So.
Yeah, and that's why like it's such a. I appreciate what you do a lot. I know you probably hear from. I can imagine the families of those very veterans, and other fellow soldiers who have served and continue to serve now. It's again, it's just the least we can do to give back to these people. I want to ask you too, like with your non-founding or your nonprofit organization, the Wounded Vet Run. Like, why a bike run by any chance? I was just like curious, like why bike? Like, is that just like a marine? Like, is that just like a motorcycles are just popular within the military kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it just was a crossroads for me after my first tour, and I wanted to own a Harley Davidson, and I said, what if? And a lot of my younger veterans were coming home buying motorcycles, Harley Davidsons and stuff like that. And I said, let's do a motorcycle charity ride. Let's get all of us together. I'll throw in $20 and see what we can get this kid. And it started 13 years ago. And it became a very successful idea. I had 300 people show up for Vincent Mannion, Brodeur, from Cape Cod, who was injured with the 82nd Airborne in Iraq. He had a bicranial replacement surgery. And I raised something like 30 grand for him. And then I deployed to Afghanistan. One of my own buddies lost his legs, and I said, why don't I do that motorcycle charity ride again when I get back for him? Those 300 attendees turned into 1,200 attendees. And I said, I think we're onto something. Let's pick different wounded veterans every year and do this. And now it's like, I'm telling you, 4,000 or 5,000 people come. So I've been doing it for 13 years. I've never taken a salary. All the money goes to wounded veterans or charities of their choosing.
And let me ask you, actually, with dealing with, because that's a big issue. I would like to hear your opinion on is just how our country treats our veterans when they come back when it comes to finances, housing, like setting them up for coming back.
I think it's really good now. I think
now? Okay.
I think right after the wars in Iraq, there was a lot of rustiness and speed bumps that because we hadn't had. Excuse me.
I know I get bored sometimes.
No, I work overnight, so.
Oh yeah.
We hadn't had any experience with this many returning veterans, especially wounded veterans, since the Vietnam War, and that was all shitty and sucked back then. So there was President Bush totally revamped the VA system. They became priority. Veterans became priority. Now, to me personally, the veterans benefits in this country are great. They are great. We're taken care of. You just got to navigate it and get signed up correctly. Sure, there's going to be a lot of veterans that say, oh, well, this sucked and that sucked. And I've had negative experiences with the VA. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, I have. But you got to look to where it came from and what it is today. If you have your ducks in a row and you're squared away, you can get exactly what you want out of the VA stuff for healthcare. So.
Okay, yeah, because that's the stuff I heard is just like, I always heard like a negative thing about it. Like, it can't
There was. In the early 2000s, I mean, my experience of being a veteran, excuse me, in the early 2000s, it was a rough start for them. They were coming out of the Vietnam slump. There was no influx of returning veterans. So now, all of a sudden, the 9/11 happens, all these veterans coming home. So yeah, you had VAs, places with fucking rats running through them. You had wait time for veterans who were suicidal. You had veterans not getting their disability checks. You had veterans committing suicide in the parking lots of VA hospitals. Like that happened. It still happens now, but the services are, in my opinion, good. I'm not going to say they're grade A+, but they're good. I mean, think about other countries that have militaries don't have this stuff, so.
Mm-hmm. You gotta appreciate what we can do, at least. And it's only gonna get better now, again.
I know tons of guys who never even saw combat that are getting major disability payments, so.
And actually, talk about, like, PTSD and stuff like that. I don't know if it's something you've looked into yourself, like, when it comes to, there's this one non-profit organization called, the acronym's MAPS. But it's Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies.
Okay.
And what they've done is they've
microdosing and mushrooms and stuff.
So you've heard,
yeah. I mean, guys have been doing it before it was even.
Oh, okay. Studied and.
Guys. I knew guys that were doing that stuff. I think whatever helps the mind, whatever helps the mind and helps promote therapeutic use of whatever kinds of medications you want to view it as, whether it's mushrooms or any type of psychedelics or marijuana or pills or whatever. I believe that low doses of medication can really seriously help people's lives, no matter what the medication is, if it's done. And I promote whatever new stuff that doesn't get veterans hooked on drugs and ruin their lives. So if microdosing mushrooms, psychedelics helps veterans with PTSD and stress disorders, I promote it as long as it doesn't start a chain reaction like Percocets did to people and Vicodin did to people and OxyContin did to people. I mean, destroyed millions of lives, really. As long as it doesn't turn into that, then I'm for it. Yeah. Because if the whole painkiller saga, I mean, it went crazy.
Yeah,
the pills.
Even my own, family members myself were suffering
addiction
from it.
and then robberies and overdoses and then going from that to heroin was like the next thing for a lot of people. And that, it fucked up. I'm not gonna say a generation, but there's kids from the 90s to the mid 2000s got hooked on all that stuff.
I was gonna say I have a few questions. I know we still got. I was gonna say we got around like 10 minutes left, but I still actually have a few questions.
Yeah.
Because I know it would just be good. Like, how was it your experience coming back from war and stuff like what would you say for someone out there, a veteran right now in your same shoes, coming back? Like, what would be the best thing for them to help out? Keep them busy. Like,
Yeah, no, I mean, one thing the World War II veterans taught me, I didn't have a really, traumatic, friend die in my arms type scenario in the military. I didn't see heavy amounts of combat. I saw enough, and I did my time, and that's it. So, but having interviewed over uh, just shy of 400 World War II veterans, having been around police officers for the last 10 years, having been around thousands of veterans with my nonprofit, the best advice I can give any veteran is just hit the ground running and stay busy. Do not sit at home like a couch potato and dwell on the past and become overweight and use drugs or alcohol and collect a paycheck and do nothing. Get your ass out there, get a job, get a hobby. Your community needs you. This country needs you. And there's two types of veterans out there: those who feel like they did too much, and those like they feel like they didn't do enough. And I encourage people to be the veterans that feel like they didn't do enough, because just because you came home with all four limbs, some guys did not. Just because you came home psychologically sound, some guys did not. We got to be there for them for the next 50 years. So go get involved in your local civic groups, veteran groups, charities. Write a book, get a job that actually demands something out of you, and that's my advice. So.
And I want to ask, kind of just more of a person, like, what is it that you want to leave behind for? You have two sons, right?
Yep.
Oh, two sons, awesome. So, what's the legacy you want to leave behind for them when they look at your life, and just what lessons do you want them to learn?
Yeah, I want them. First of all, I want to be known as a good father and a good dad, and I think I'm on the right track for that. But yeah, I want to. I don't want all the stuff I'm involved in to take away from them. So I want them to say, "Wow, my dad was a pioneer. My dad was truly a fighter for veterans," and to carry that legacy, and for them to carry it on if they want to. I want them to do whatever they want. If they don't want to serve in the military and do that, and they want to be a paper pusher in the business world or something like that, then I support that. I certainly support if they don't want to be police officers, because it's just to be a police officer, you got to really be everything: therapist, an elder social worker, a child care worker, a medic, a police officer, an enforcer, all you have to be everything, a doctor. So I just want them to know that I could have been anything. I lived a life of public service because I wanted to, and that's what I believed morally was what my time, my country needed. So.
No, that's all. That's beautiful, man. Honestly, because a lot of people, I think a lot of men too nowadays, especially my generation, we lack purpose. Like, what's our purpose in this life? And I think it simply is like you said, just to give.
Yeah.
Give back to your fellow, individual and your neighbors, communities.
Yeah.
Build them up and do what you got to do. But Andrew, man, I want to say thank you so much for your time, man.
Thank
Seriously,
you.
It's an honor.
Thank you, man. Thank you. I
want
appreciate
to say first, thank you for just taking the time to even write this book. Cause
Yeah.
this is one of the best reads I've ever.
Thank you, man.
This is actually where I want.
I'm gonna give you a part 1 today before you leave. So.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. And I was gonna say before we sign off and stuff, how can you can say anything you like, but most importantly, I want people to know how they can support you, get the copy of your book, anything you would like to let
So
them know.
I wrote 2 #1 best-selling books, The Rifle. They're on Amazon, called The Rifle, and
Right here, beautiful copy. Look at this art.
Instagram. You can find me at The Rifle, and then on my websites, the WWII.rifle.com, or through Instagram, you'll see I do different GoFundMes and stuff to help bring World War II veterans back overseas. And this will be my last 2 trips are coming up: the 80th anniversary of D-Day, Normandy, and then the 80th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge next winter. So and those are my last 2 times, and I'm done. So
just because
their age and the demand and stuff like that. So.
And then you're going to continue on though with the Vietnam veterans, like taking them. Is that something you're planning on doing, or you can keep it secret?
No, I definitely probably before 2025, I plan on to dive into the Vietnam generation of veterans. So.
Awesome, man. I'm excited. And thank you so much again.
Anytime, buddy. Thanks for coming by.
Nah, thank you. And guys, thank you so much as always for listening to the podcast. The most important thing is I hope you guys are taking care of yourself and the people around you, because you know why? You deserve it. And share this with your grandma, your grandpa, your uncle, your sister, your cousins. Much appreciated. Stay safe and peace.